Welcome to The World Over Live. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We join you tonight from Anaheim, California. This was the site of the 130th Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus. While here, we interviewed a number of dignitaries in the church, including Supreme Knight Carl Anderson. We open with our interview with Mr. Anderson. He spoke about his annual report, religious liberty, and a few other matters on the minds of Catholics. Take a listen. Let's talk for a moment about a new campaign you all just rolled out. Now, marriage is under attack here in the United States. Religious liberty, as you mentioned in your speech, is also under attack. Does the United States really need a civility campaign at this moment, Carl?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, because so many of these issues, they become so emotional, at least for certain people. But in general, for the past few election cycles, people have become more and more frustrated. Now 8 in 10 Americans are saying they're very frustrated with the tone of political campaigns. And 2/3 think it's bad for the country, and 3/4 think it's getting worse. So yes, I think we do, so that we provide a context in which we can have a discussion on the issues and not be simply attacking people by personalities.
Your Marist poll, which you quoted, 74% of people think that there's a more negative tone to the politics of today. 66% think that people are simply attacking their opponents. But the fact is, you worked in the Reagan White House. These negative campaigns seem to work. Whether it's the swift voting of John Kerry or the last campaign with John McCain, negative campaigns seem to work. Why do people respond yet say they're upset with these campaigns?
Well, maybe they've worked in part in the past, but I'd make a distinction between negative and civility. Because I think if somebody is clouding their record, obfuscating their record, they're misrepresenting things. I think to point that out clearly with a tone of civility is doing the voters a service. So not every negative necessarily bad, but it's the tone and it's the way we conduct the discussion.
Now, how you are encouraging people to sign a petition. Tell us about that and how that will tangibly, do you think, change this hostile, negative political approach?
Well, I think the important part is, first of all, to give people a voice. There's something they can do, sign this petition for civility. And secondly, it gives us something to talk about and advertise about in terms of some of the newspaper ads we're doing and some other things. So it's a way of generating and letting people know, look, it's not just you and I. It's 8 out of 10 Americans want to change here. So listen. Let's do something about it.
You said in your speech that Catholics can raise the level of our national discourse. How? Obviously, this campaign is part of sensitizing them, I think, to that. But how can they raise the level of discourse? Do they even, here's a question. When you look at these polls, when you look at the way Catholics have voted over the last few cycles, it doesn't seem they even are absolutely sure what the church teaches, much less raising the national discourse.
Well, now, excellent point, okay, because it depends what the pollsters, who they're asking. If they're just self-identifying Catholics, you find that there are a large segment of the Catholic population.
Culturally Catholic.
Well, they no longer go to church. They no longer really believe in what the church teaches. That's why they don't go to church. And not surprisingly, they don't support church teaching, especially when the church teaching may be a little difficult. So you find there are a lot of, quote, Catholics, unquote, that have the same views on these issues as, say, very liberal Jews or secularists who have no faith. So you combine those with the mass attending, believing Catholics who take seriously what their church teaches, and it has a way of maybe balancing them out. But if you stick to Catholics who are believers, very strong.
As I read more into this and looked at some of the polling data, haven't we always had an uncivil political debate, whether it's Alexander Hamilton talking about Thomas Jefferson or the other way around? these guys were, these are our founding fathers. They were pretty personal, brutal, and they would put everything out there in the public domain to push and advance their agenda and their party. Isn't that the American way in some ways, politically speaking?
Well, they even had duels, and I think Hamilton
lost, unfortunately.
Lost, yeah, unfortunately. But look, no, the campaigns, there can be a rough and tumble. But I think what's happening, I think what the American people are sensing, is it's becoming the norm. It's not becoming the exception. And I think what's even worse is in the polling that we found, younger Americans are reflecting that. They don't see this as much of a problem because it's all they've known over the last couple election cycles. I mean, I used to work in the Reagan White House. The famous line of President Reagan to Tip O'Neill, the Democrat Speaker of the House, it's after 6 o'clock now, Tip, come on down. We're no longer enemies, we can have a drink together.
Right.
I don't think you see too many politicians in Washington on either side of the aisle getting together socially because they can deal with each other as friends. I think what happened in the past was, look, we understand always going to be Democrats, always going to be Republicans, so let's try to solve a problem by some kind of compromise. Now it's more like, let's destroy this
the
party,
other person,
let's destroy that candidate, and then we get everything we want. Well, democracies, that's not the way they should work.
Is that a function, do you think, of the raising, if you will, of the stakes, particularly on these deeply held issues, whether it's marriage, the life of the unborn, religious liberty, the ability to pray, put a monument up? These issues have now entered the political sphere, and they are so hotly charged, and they're so personal and run so deep that people feel their very being is under attack in the political sphere that perhaps in the age of Tip O'Neill and Reagan was not the case.
Well, there's something to be said for that. Of course, the pro-life issue, which has always been very emotional, deeply felt, was back with Reagan even before Reagan as president. I think part of it is almost a totalitarian kind of sensibility that refuses to allow an alternative. See, what's happened in the debate about religious liberty is not enough that you disagree with the Catholic Church. Let's marginalize the Church's ability to speak. Let's force the Church to follow what we say has to be done. And so it's a different kind of mentality taking hold, and I think that's very, very problematic for a democracy.
You made the case in a great speech before the Catholic Press Association earlier this year. You said, Catholics must stop picking and choosing which parts of Catholic social teaching we will accept. Explain that to people, because the fact is, whatever the politics of the moment is, Catholics are partially responsible for creating that moment and the political landscape we see before us.
Well, I think every Christian, but certainly Catholics, ought to be judging politics by the Bible and not the Bible by politics, right? And so we should be looking at party platforms, candidates' positions, in terms of Catholic social teaching. And you hardly ever see a candidate or a politician saying, you know, I have to reconsider this because the teaching of my faith tells me morally we should be going in a different direction, right? Now, there's some issues which are prudential issues. How much you put in a budget, how much you take out of a budget. But there are other issues that are not prudential like this. They're intrinsic evils. They're always evil. Doesn't matter what your intention is, the act itself. The actor may not be a sinner, depending upon his intentionality, but the act is intrinsically evil. Abortion is that, right? Destroying marriage is that. Destroying the ability of the church to have the freedom to carry on its mission, I think is intrinsically evil. And so then the question becomes, can you really support, can you vote for somebody who's promoting intrinsic evil? One of the things I was saying to the Knights of Columbus convention here, we take great pride in our investment philosophy. So there are many companies we refuse to invest in because they profit from intrinsically evil products, right? They produce abortifacients, or they're in the pornography business. We won't buy any of that. So if I won't buy support a company who's profiting from intrinsically evil products? Why should I vote for a candidate who's promoting intrinsically evil policies?
Now, there was an idea raised from the floor of this convention by Cardinal Timothy Dolan. Roll that tape.
Anderson for president.
Your reaction?
Well, you could say I think what he meant was president of the Knights of Columbus.
I don't think so. I think he was talking a little broader.
Well, look, I think what the Cardinal is suggesting is that we ought to have Catholics in public office that try to take seriously the broad teaching of the Church. Look, your test of being faithful isn't when you agree, right? The test of being faithful is when you have doubts or you may disagree. That's when your faith is tested. So to get up time after time after time and say, no, I disagree with my church's teaching. And now we even have politicians who are saying, well, I question the motivation of the church.
Who is the church to even make that statement?
Right. And we know what kind of issues we're talking about here, that it's church's position is discriminatory or rises out of prejudice. Now you're attacking the people. You're attacking the bishops, not for their views, but for them, attacking the Holy Father.
And this really ties into this whole religious liberty, religious freedom argument that has been going on for so long now and that we're still in the middle of. The Knights have a long history of protecting religious expression and that First Amendment right, whether it's fighting the Klan back in the 20s or fast forwarding to defending monuments in certain areas, commemorating our war dead, putting God in the Pledge of Allegiance. Where do you see this battle now?
Well, I think it's fundamental because really what's at stake is the right of conscience of every American to act. Look, sure, you can guarantee religious freedom if by that you mean worship or prayer. You know, you can go in your closet and pray.
Right.
But that's not what our founding fathers had in mind. They wanted a country that was open and free so people could express and exercise their religious faith in a way that benefited the society. We have to remember, our great country is a product of millions and millions and millions of people of faith whose faith inspired their actions. And you look at the history of the Catholic Church. I mean, we built schools, we built hospitals, we built orphanages. Why? All of that was an expression of our religious freedom and our religious belief to help our brothers and sisters, right? That's what Christians are called to do. Now the government says, well, you can only do that if it's according to what we say we want done, okay? So you're going to do health care? Well, you got to provide all these services too, or get out of the health care. You want to be a doctor? You want to do abortion? Go be a truck driver. You can't be a doctor anymore. See, it's a removal of people of faith if they happen to disagree with the current, I'll say, fad of the government. And the First Amendment was designed to protect us from that.
Listening to your address here to the Knights, I mean, this is remarkable, and I've been speaking throughout our coverage. The work of the Knights goes really uncovered so often, particularly the local chapters. They're helping the disabled, they're rebuilding homes, they're building ramps, they're doing all of these activities on the local level. They rarely get covered. The other part of this story that's rarely covered is your membership is up, your donations are huge. How, in the midst of an economic downturn, are you seeing this sort of not only civic involvement from your members, but also the ability to still engage in great philanthropic work?
Well, I think we have many, many men who take the principles seriously. Charity, unity, fraternity. And it's the unity that links to charity. So that the more you get involved in works of charity, and nothing wrong with writing checks, but I'm not talking about writing checks. I'm talking about picking up a crippled child, putting her in a wheelchair, and seeing the look on her face. You have that experience, you want to continue to do that. You help a Haitian child who's an earthquake victim. I mean, when I was in Haiti, I met a young woman who lost legs, and every member of her family was killed. And yet she was deeply spiritual, thanked God for us giving her a wheelchair. Now you imagine what her life is going to be like in a place like Haiti with no family members and missing a leg, right? So her faith, her way of being, and if anybody had reason to be down in the dumps, right? But she wasn't. I mean, it's inspiring. And when you do more of that, you see that there's an exchange between people who give material gifts and people who give spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm. Final question. There is some reportage out there about the Al Smith dinner, which has always been the great platform for the presidential candidates each year. President Obama has apparently been invited. Your thoughts on that? Is that appropriate to platform a candidate who is in such opposition to church teaching in such a public way?
Great question. I don't want Cardinal Dolan to take back his endorsement of me for presidents, but I think, you know, if you look at Al Smith, there are a lot of people at the time Al Smith ran for president who didn't want to give him a platform, burn crosses as he went in to give speeches, things like that. So I think there's certain established forum that don't necessarily imply an endorsement. And so might be interesting to see what he has to say. I think we have to be, as we should be for all candidates, critical analysis. And being very attentive to who's speaking accurately and who isn't.
What is the next big agenda item on the Knights' agenda? Where do you want to take this organization in the next year?
Well, I think, following up with what we've been talking about, I think we're making a very strong case that you help build the country together, knit the country together in a solidarity based on charity. And I would hope all Catholics would try to do just a little more to charity because it lays a great foundation for the country. Secondly, we got to raise civility. And then I would say, thirdly, I mean, we really have to get serious about Catholic social teaching. And we have to say to people, you know what? If you disregard the Church's teaching on these public issues, then, you know, don't expect our support. Don't expect our support as Catholics. If enough Catholics said that, we could transform politics, because then the parties and the candidates would have to come to us, right? They'd have to come to us.
And that really ties into your great efforts to catechize, as the Pope mentioned in his address, speech to you all, or letter rather, to the Knights, that it's so important, and he was commending your work, of educating Catholics as to the Church teaching, because so many people simply don't know what the Church teaches or requires.
And I think the other big issue is, what does it mean to have a Catholic conscience, right? It's not just, I get to pick and choose whatever I want, it's my conscience, therefore I'm okay, right? You have the responsibility to have an educated, formed conscience. So if you're a politician who's for abortion, you tell me, you've read Evangelium Vitae? You've read what the Second Vatican Council has to say about abortion? You've listened to Mother Teresa talk about abortion, and now you tell me you disagree. How is that, really? How is that, really? See, so we have to take that, we have to confront civilly, but we have to ask them, you know, okay, so you're for abortion. You mean the 100+ pages of Evangelium Vitae doesn't convince you. Exactly why?
While here, we spoke to Cardinal Raymond Burke, a familiar face to viewers of this program. He is the Apostolic Signatura in Rome, always outspoken, always clear. We spoke to him about the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, as well as the exaltation of the extraordinary rite of the liturgy. Take a listen. Let's talk for a moment about the burning issue that has certainly consumed so much of our airwaves and so many headlines, this battle over religious liberty here in the United States. You saw this coming, though, and years ago wrote in so many letters, apostolic notes, when you were in St. Louis, even your musings on the canonical requirements. You said, look, this is coming. It's coming down the pike. Something has to be done. Do you think people now get the message?
I think many more people are getting the message that in fact what has been happening in our country is a kind of a growing totalitarianism where people are no longer able to practice their religion freely with regard to what actually is something that religion teaches but is also taught naturally, and that is the moral law, what the Holy Father oftentimes refers to as the ethos in our society. Fundamentally, it has to do with the respect for the inviolable dignity of human life, the respect for the integrity of marriage as a union of one man and one woman for life, and fidelity, which is by its nature procreative. And third, it has to do with the pursuit of truth. In other words, that you have a right to act according to your own conscience as long as that conscience is rightly formed and attuned to the truth. And I believe more and more people are aware, but certainly not enough. We cannot talk about this sufficiently at this time because in our nation in general, I have the impression that many people have been dulled with regard to these issues. As long as life is basically convenient and prosperous, they don't pay attention, and what's happening is that what is most essential to them is being taken away from them. When now someone is telling you that you have to pay, for example, for the coverage of acts which are always and everywhere wrong, you're in a very bad situation.
Do you think, as I look at this, there's so much attention, so much focus on politics, this candidate versus that candidate, Republican versus Democrat? Isn't it a wider problem? We are expecting of candidates what the Catholic people apparently cannot agree on, which is this everybody wants high morality, everybody going, living the full spectrum of Catholic thought. They're not even sure what Catholic thought is at this moment. Isn't that what the real problem is?
There is a fundamental problem within the Church, I am sad to say, that has existed now for 40 to 50 years, and that is that we have done a very poor work of catechizing, of instructing Catholics in the faith. Especially the children and young people received a very thin, watery catechesis that did not address the critical issues of our time. And also in the adult catechesis through the Sunday homily and so forth, there's been a tendency not to address the difficult, the hard issues of our time, which our faith always needs to address. And so we see the result in this kind of economic chaos that we have in our country, a moral chaos which is absolutely frightening. And now even the government moves in to tell us that religion has nothing to do with anything beyond the walls of the church. In other words, when you're inside your church, they've redefined the freedom of religion to freedom of worship. Because you can worship in your church, but they don't understand that worship, as our Lord says, is in spirit and in truth. The worship that we give to God in church has everything to do with the way we act outside of church. And you cannot, as some Catholic politicians have been saying for a long time, and erroneously so, that you're personally opposed to these grave evils like abortion or like embryonic stem cell research or the redefinition of marriage, and that you're personally opposed to it. But as a politician, you have to be in favor of these things, either because a majority of the citizens want it or whatever. No, your Catholic faith, your adherence to the moral law demands that you uphold these truths exactly in the public square where the common good is at play.
So you're obliged, in other words, even as a politician.
Even as a politician, educator, I don't care what it is. Also in the universities, this notion of academic freedom has been so abused, so that somehow academic freedom is construed that you have a right to teach lies and to teach untruth, and instead of in a Catholic institution, instead of being held to teach and to deepen an understanding of the truths of the faith.
Well, you wrote eloquently about Canon 812, about the mandatum.
Yes.
And this is a requirement of university and college professors who teach theology to teach in kind with the church. There was a huge explosion of a story in Washington. The Arlington Diocese was asking catechists and teachers of religious education to sign just a pledge of faith that I adhere to the Catholic teaching. This was greeted with outrage, people resigning. Your thoughts on, is this really forcing people to adopt and to march in lockstep with the teaching, or Is this simply truth in advertising?
It's certainly truth in advertising. As someone said to me one time, you don't expect someone who's working for the Ford Motor Company to be promoting General Motors products.
Yeah.
But that's part of it, and a significant part of it. Why would you teach in a Catholic school and not be committed to what the Catholic Church teaches? But second, it has to do with your own integrity. In other words, you claim to be a teacher in a Catholic institution, and yet you claim to have the freedom to teach things other than what the Church teaches. It isn't a question of you being constrained to do something against your conscience. It's a question of you being freed by the law of the Church to do what you're called to do. And the opposite, the injustice is in having a Catholic teacher in a school where parents and children and young people are coming to receive a so-called Catholic education, teach his or her own version of the truth. And so the young person and the families are not receiving what they justly should receive, and that is a Catholic education. And so the whole notion of freedom has been perverted in this kind of discourse.
Let's talk for a moment, and it sort of fits into this. In the United States, we've been watching endless coverage of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. This is the group of superiors of female religious houses. They have gone down a path that has been, it's a perilous path for a long time. The Church is now asking them to reform their ways, rewrite their bylaws, and to really save themselves, come into in a spirit of dialogue, return to the table, and figure out what their charism is, and repair the way that they've been going. The sisters say, they're meeting right now in St. Louis, they claim, this is a showdown we didn't ask for. What are people missing in this story, and what does the view from Rome look like?
To me, it's as simple as this. Consecrated religious, the sisters are consecrated religious, are bound to the Vicar of Christ by a very significant bond, because they have professed to live in Christ-like poverty, chastity, and obedience. In other words, to follow Christ in an exemplary way, and so to be a source of strength and inspiration for the whole people of God. Now, how in the world can these consecrated religious who profess to follow Christ more closely, and I would ask, how often do you hear them speaking about Christ, but how can they be opposed to what the Vicar of Christ is asking them? This is a contradiction. We could go into the whole history of this matter, but the question now is for a conversion to the true nature of religious life, and to accept gratefully and humbly what the Holy Father is asking through his representatives, and to reform the organization. And if it can't be reformed, then it doesn't have a right to continue. And the fact of the matter is, which few people realize, is that it was the Holy See who founded the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. And why should it not have a right to say, look, this organization is no longer fulfilling the mission for which we founded it?
I want to shift for a moment and talk about something that it gets very little coverage, but to my eye, it's one of the most profound and, I would dare say, long-lasting agenda items on Benedict's list. And that would be, 5 years ago, his allowing the extraordinary rite, what some call the Old Latin Mass, to exist side by side with the Novus Ordo, with the new Mass. Your thoughts on what that means in the history of the Church, and what is he trying to communicate to the Catholic people over these last 5 years, despite the reception it's received in so many dioceses?
What the Holy Father, and I'm just reflecting now what he himself has written, is trying to communicate is the continuity of our Catholic faith down the centuries. Sadly, what happened after the Second Vatican Council was an idea developed that we were forming a new church, and that everything that had gone on since the time of the first Christians was all retrograde and in some way a defection from from what was supposedly this church of freedom and truth and joy. And what happened in the process was the tradition was lost, especially in the sacred liturgy. There were many abuses, and even the reform of the rite itself was so radical that people didn't see sometimes how there was a continuity between what's now called the ordinary form of the Roman Rite and the extraordinary form. Now the Holy Father, this is important not just for the sacred liturgy, but it's important for every aspect of our life. We can see it in catechesis, we can see it in the moral life, we can see it in family life, religious life, priestly formation. No need to go into all of that. The Holy Father rightly has put his focus on the sacred liturgy because this is the highest and most perfect expression of our life in Christ. And if we can reestablish in the celebration of the sacred liturgy a strong sense of the worship of God as God wants it, not my creation, but the gift of God, and sacred worship has been handed down to us in the church through the centuries, we'll get a lot of other things straightened out at the same time, and it has to start with the sacred liturgy. And so what he's asking for is freely celebrate both of these forms, both the ordinary and extraordinary form, and let them mutually enrich each other so that continuity, that unity, that hermeneutic, as he calls it, of reform, which is always one of unity and continuity, will have its effect, and there will be a reform of the reform, I like to call it. Some people don't like that, but I think that's what we need. What happened? There's just no question that after the council, good things happened, to be certain, but there were, in a number of ways, the sacred liturgy the reform of the sacred liturgy got off track, and now we need to bring things back in line. The new translation, the New English translation of the Roman Missal, is a wonderful step forward. But there are other.
You are still hearing, and I've seen emails, and I've gotten even emails from priests, monsignors, even a bishop or two, who claim the new translation is hard to proclaim, people still don't get it, and it's awkward in our mouths. You would say what?
I find it beautiful. For my own part, I find myself reflecting on the prayers of the Mass now, before the Mass and afterwards, and I've had lay people tell me that too. The richness of the full richness of the text is there, and as it should be, and in an English that I don't find difficult to proclaim. It takes a little more thought and a little more care, but wouldn't we want to do the best in our worship of God? Wouldn't we want to offer Him the best? We had in the church when I was growing up, there was a kind of special language we used in church. And I was sorry to see it go, but we used some old forms of English and so forth, and words like deign and beseech and so forth. And then all of a sudden that all had to go away. There wasn't anything wrong with that. It was a beautiful language. It was a language we used in talking to God.
Elevated language.
Exactly.
Yeah, epic language.
Yes. And now the new we have now, the conditional clauses and so forth are back. So it's not just this kind of almost juvenile kind of language where, you know, we say God is good, let us be good, amen.
Yeah.
But the whole richness of the faith is more fully expressed in these prayers, and with some very beautiful poetic language.
I always tell people, look, nobody gripes when Hamlet says to be or not to be, instead of maybe I should kill myself today. You know, it's exactly. Elevated language. It opens us up, and it's what the church always had. When people said, "Oh, this is terrible. This it's such a departure," I said, "A departure. Pick up an old St. Joseph Missal. If you look to the other side from the Latin,
those missals we used when I was growing up, they had beautiful English language.
It's
we used
very
to follow
close to this translation.
Yes, it is. And a lot of the language, for instance, I hear people making a big fuss over dewfall in the second Eucharistic prayer. That is one of the most scriptural allusions you could ask for. Dew was always seen in the Holy Scriptures as a sign of grace, of God's favor coming down to us. That's a beautiful image. Or to have restored, for instance, the image of the centurion in the prayer, and when the priest presents the sacred host to us, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof, enter under my roof. There are just many, many wonderful aspects to it. So I thank God for those who worked on it overall. And it wasn't easy, as you well know, having covered the meetings of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Yeah.
But it's really an important step forward.
Very good.
Yes.
Your Eminence, Cardinal Raymond Burke, thank you so much for taking time away, and I hope you won't make yourself a stranger back home. You shouldn't give everything to Rome. You got to save something for us.
Well, I love the United States and I love the church in this country, and I'll try to keep doing what little I can.
When we return to the world over, Archbishop William Lori, and later an address by Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the keynote at this 130th Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. We are at the 130th Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus from Anaheim, California, and I am joined not only by the chairman of the USCCB's Ad Hoc Committee for Religious Liberty, but the chaplain for the Knights of Columbus, Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore. Great
Nice
to
to
see
be
you
with
again.
you, Raymond.
Now, we have
Thank
not
you.
been together since the Fortnight for Freedom.
Yes.
Your thoughts in the aftermath of that fortnight. How successful was it? Where do people go from here?
First of all, I think it was highly successful. I think something like 190 dioceses participated, at least that we know of. And that consisted of masses and rallies, prayer services of all kinds, lectures, and of course the big signature events beginning in Baltimore, ending in Washington. And so I think it did a lot to raise up the issue, to make people think about it. And so that was the first step. I think another important milestone is this very convention. The fact that religious liberty is the theme of this year's Knights of Columbus convention, that so many Knights will be going back home energized about the issue and better informed. I think as we move into the fall, we are certainly looking at encouraging individual families, Father Patrick Peyton style, to pray the rosary for religious liberty, to invoke the help of our Blessed Lady, and a lot of other things besides.
When you stand back and consider, there are now, since August 1st, a slew of Catholic businesses, small businesses, even social service outreach, that are now subjected to fines for not complying with this HHS mandate. Your message to them, and what do you believe is the next step for them? I mean, obviously, some of them are suing in court, but a lot of them aren't.
Sure. Well, first I want to applaud those who are suing, and I'd like to recognize the good news out of Denver. It's not definitive good news, but the judge there issued an injunction in favor of a Catholic employer who wants to run his business according to Catholic principles. And if the judge grants an injunction, that means he thinks the underlying case of this Catholic corporation is pretty solid. So that's good news. I'd also say that that there's a bit of a reprieve in some insurance plans because they might be grandfathered, or sometimes the enrollment doesn't start until later. In the meantime, the Conference of Bishops has assembled good, solid moral theologians like John Haas, Dr. John Haas, to help individuals in that situation to reach good, prudent moral decisions. I do think that some of them will take the extraordinary step, though, of just refusing to go along with this. The government, but here's the point. These people, they're providing good jobs. They have good health care plans. They are people of justice. They should not be in this position. The government should not be forcing these conscientious individuals to violate the teachings of their church and the tenets of their consciences. We deserve better as citizens.
The momentum of that fortnight, it was the coverage of that moment and the excitement and participation of the laity was really intense for those 2 weeks, which is a long time to maintain intensity for anybody, any group of people. How does the bishops, or do the bishops, continue that momentum? And we had emails asking in the aftermath of the fortnight, are the bishops going to get politically active? Are they going to provide some sort of guidance moving in the political season, given that this seems to be a political redress? That's all you really have here.
Well, let's begin with one thing that was designed to maintain the momentum. That's our texting campaign. Hope you don't mind a free commercial here.
Fire away.
You text the word freedom to 377-377, or Spanish libertad to 377-377, and you are brought in. Then you get back a message, and you are sort of in the loop. You're getting updates, you're getting encouragement, and then when the time comes to assist in the religious liberty effort, you're all equipped to do it with the click of your iPhone or your BlackBerry or whatever. So text the word freedom or libertad to 377-377 and you're on. I can't encourage your viewers enough to get on that network because it's important for us to communicate behind, above, and before and around the mainstream media, because we can't rely on the mainstream media to get this message across. And then you raised the question of voting conscientiously. I thought something very important was said in the Supreme Knight's report today about that. Namely, we have to really inform ourselves in two ways. First of all, what does our church teach? And it's not just a position of blind faith, as Benedict said, but it is our positions are reason informed by faith. And so I think we should be proud of that. And we should know what the church teaches about all the issues that are before us. But secondly, we should recognize which of those issues involve intrinsic evil. For example, abortion. For example, denying fundamental rights like religious liberty. And we should vote for no candidate that promotes, as part of the platform or as part of his own or her own positions, intrinsic evils, even if that means not voting. I think that it's only when we say we deserve better than intrinsic evil that we really become active and we really become informed that we're going to transform the political process from within. And it is badly in need of being transformed. The American people are saying they don't like the tenor of it. Well, one of the reasons we might not like the tenor of it is because it's no longer principled. It really is people's opinions, and it's whoever is stronger or better financed or more sympathized with the media who comes out on top. Shouldn't be like that. Wasn't meant to be like that.
Let's talk about this relationship between the defense of liberty and religious liberty and the new evangelization. In your mind, they are linked.
Oh, very much so. First of all, why is it that God gave us liberty? Okay, was it just so we'd have the freedom to choose, to be able to do whatever we want? No. It's freedom for excellence, as the great Father Servais Pincers taught us. It's freedom to attain virtue. It's freedom for the good and for holiness, ultimately. So, why are we defending freedom? So that, unencumbered, the church can fulfill her mission. And as Pope Paul taught us, the church's evangelization is not just something the church does. It's the church's deepest identity, to bring the gospel and the values flowing from the gospel to bear on the culture and to transform it within. Pope Paul, and it's been repeated by subsequent popes, have seen as the great drama of our times the separation of faith and culture. That's not going to be healed by the hierarchy or by priests. That's going to be healed by a well-informed, committed Catholic laity that's going to bring the gospel to bear on the culture. But if you have things like the HHS mandate that says to Catholic employers, check your faith at the door when you leave in the morning, or when it's said to Catholic affiliated organizations like the Knights of Columbus, you're in the same boat, you have to conform too. What the government is doing is reducing religious liberty simply to freedom of worship and telling us we can't bring our faith to bear upon the culture of which we are a part. And that's our God-given right as citizens.
And finally, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York was on hand. He focused his keynote address on the institution of marriage and the need to protect it. Give a listen.
Carl Anderson, thanks for giving me, get this folks, the honeymoon suite. Granted, I was a bit surprised. Let me assure you that's never happened to me before. But it did remind me of a great story told by the Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. Seems as if he too was offered the honeymoon suite at a hotel where he was to give a talk. It was a southern city, at that time a city somewhat unfamiliar with Catholic ways. And as Archbishop Sheen was leaving his honeymoon suite for supper, the maid offered to turn down his bed. And the Archbishop said, sure, I'd appreciate that service. So when the Archbishop returned after supper, sure enough, the bed was turned down, and there was a ment on both pillows. And on one side of the bed, the maid had carefully unpacked and laid out Archbishop Sheen's pajamas. And on the other side of the bed, apparently for Mrs. Sheen, was the beautiful lace alb that he used when he said Mass. Which brings me to my topic for a couple minutes this evening, namely marriage. I'd like to talk to you for a couple minutes about marriage. See, usually at this state's dinner, thousands of our knights look up in admiration to this dais, this head table, this crimson tide of bishops and cardinals, right? But tonight I'm going literally to turn the tables as we up here look out with awe and admiration and deep appreciation upon you, our knights and their wives, united in the sacrament of marriage. For this evening, I want to salute marriage. And it would be tough to find anyone anywhere who has done more to defend, strengthen, and promote marriage than you, Knights of Columbus, and your cherished wives and families. In fact, as you're probably aware, one of the driving motives of the Venerable Father Michael McGivney in founding the Knights was precisely to assist men better fulfill their vocations as husbands and dads. We Catholics are hopeless romantics when it comes to married love. Against all the odds, we still believe that when a man and woman vow that they'll love and honor each other, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poor, until death do us part, they really mean it. We still hold fast to the teaching of the Bible, that God so esteems marriage that he compared his own personal, passionate, eternal love for Israel to that between a husband and a wife. That St. Paul tells us that the love of Jesus for us, his church, is just like that of, guess what? A groom for his bride. We still have in our gut the church's timeless Valentine's Day card, that the love between a husband and a wife has the same characteristics as does that of God for us. It's faithful, it's forever, it brings about new life and children. We're such hopeless romantics that we contend the best way to get a hint of how much God loves us now and in eternity is to look at how you, married couples, love one another. The love of a man and woman is made holy in the sacrament of marriage and becomes the mirror of your everlasting love, as we pray at the preface for the nuptial Mass. You see why we, mostly celibates up here, look out upon you married couples with awe. We gaze out right now at thousands of icons, reflections, mirrors of the way God loves us. Now, granted, we are the first to acknowledge that this romantic, poetic, lofty, divine luster of marriage can at times be tarnished a bit in the day in, day out challenges of lifelong, life-giving, faithful love. For example, I recently celebrated the Golden Jubilee Mass of a wonderful couple I've known for decades. And I asked Pat, the husband, Pat, what's the secret of the success to your 50 years of marriage? Well, Cardinal, you know Eileen and I are both of Irish backgrounds, so for our 25th anniversary, I took her back to Ireland. I said, Pat, how thoughtful of you. And he said, yeah, and then for our 50th, I went back to get her. He said, that's the key to our success. Tension, trial, temptation, turmoil, they come indeed. But just as Jesus worked his first miracle at the request of his Blessed Mother for that newly married couple at Cana by turning water into wine, so does Jesus transform those choppy waters of tension, trial, temptation, and turmoil into a vintage wine of tried and true trust in marriage. So, brother knights, I thank you for being such metaphors of God's love. And I exhort you this evening, please, to continue now more than ever to be so. Why now more than ever? Can I give you just a couple reasons? Here's one. When I was Archbishop of Milwaukee at an Archdiocesan Pastoral Council meeting, we were discussing ways to increase vocations to the priesthood and consecrated life. Jan Riedel, one of the members of the council, commented, Archbishop Dolan, in talking about an increase in vocations for priests, sisters, and brothers, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. Uh-oh, here it comes, I thought, kind of buckling mentally my bulletproof vest, wondering what she had in mind. But she went on, the greatest vocation crisis today is to lifelong, loving, faithful, life-giving marriage. You take care of that one, you'll have all the priests and sisters you need. Well said, right? Well said. For an increase in vocations to the priesthood, consecrated life, and the sacrament of marriage should perhaps become the new phrasing for a prayer of the faithful at every Mass. So there's reason number one, now more than ever, a vocation crisis in the call to the sacrament of matrimony. Here's a second reason. The very definition of marriage as a lifelong, life-giving, faithful union of one man and one woman is in peril. With a well-choreographed and well-oiled crusade to conform marriage to the whims of the day, instead of conforming our urges to God's design, as revealed in the Bible, nature, and reflective reason. The theme of our Supreme Convention is, of course, the defense of religious freedom. And in the noble American project of ordered, virtuous democracy, government exists not to invent, define, grant, or impede genuine freedom, the first and most cherished being freedom of religion, but to protect liberties which come not from any human whim, but from the Creator. That's about as American as Yankee Stadium, folks. And a government that presumes to redefine marriage is perilously close to considering itself, not God, as the Almighty One. And then we're in danger. And a final fact that prompts all of us to a sense of renewed promotion of marriage: its singularly pivotal, irreplaceable role in what the modern popes have called the civilization of love, a topic eloquently written about by our own Supreme Knight in his book by that very title. You see, everybody, it's not just saints, pontiffs, or theologians who predicate marriage and family as the central love-promoting cell of the human enterprise. No, it's historians, sociologists, psychologists, and anthropologists. They demonstrate that when the normative relationship for a man and woman's existence is that of a husband, wife, father, and mother, well, guess what? Then things like home, industry, finance, culture, society, and governing structures are more easily directed to virtue, responsibility, and the restraining of the primitive lust and selfishness that can wreck civilization. And the most effective guarantee of a civilization of love, rather than the survival of the fittest, the culture of life over the culture of death, the law of the gift rather than the law of the get, solidarity rather than selfishness, is precisely traditional marriage and family. When that goes, we're all in trouble. Enough from this man in the honeymoon suite, because I'm preaching to the choir. I'm looking out with awe upon Knights of Columbus and their wives who radiantly live that vocation of marriage, and who got kids and grandkids to prove it, who have chosen to accept God's invitation to everlasting life as a couple, not alone, who worry about the weakening of marriage and its toxic effect in our culture and the church we cherish, but who, rather than wring hands, have joined hands to defend, promote, and strengthen the very relationship between one man, one woman, united in lifelong, life-giving, faithful love that dates back to the Garden of Eden itself. May the dawn of the year of faith, the ringing call for the new evangelization, and our renewed defense of religious freedom only renew our knights, their wives, and their families in this noble joining of hands. Thank you, Knights of Columbus. Vivat Jesus!
That's the world over for tonight. But remember, you can always find us on Facebook and Twitter. I post new items there throughout the week, so the world over goes on and on. Be sure to find us there. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo from Anaheim, California. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. Bye now.